Good morning. All right, I think we can get going. All right, so yeah, before we actually start with the actual lecture, any questions, comments, anything that you want to talk about before we actually get going?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
I'm just curious. So our groups supposed to be on the, I'm not sure how people are going by weeks. Are we supposed to be going by weeks like, so will this week be week 3 or week 4 for our group project?
So it should be the week that's on the schedule.
Okay.
So like this would be week 8, I want to say.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, so yeah, so everyone should be on the same week. Yeah, this week should be week 8. So whatever is on the the class schedule is what you should be using ideally.
Awesome, thank you.
Anything else? All right. All right, so let's get going. So like I said, so today we're going to talk a little bit about CVs and LinkedIn and just kind of setting those things up, kind of best practices, things that you might want to do to work on and improve both of those. So we're going to talk about that. And then the assignment at the end is basically, well, we'll talk about that at the end, but essentially it's just kind of revising your LinkedIn profile. And that's basically just the assignment. Okay. Okay. Oh, can everyone else hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Just making sure. Cool. Thank you. Okay. All right. Yeah. So like I said, we're talking about resumes and LinkedIn today. So let's jump into it. So I think way back when, probably like the first lecture this semester, I talked about sort of what the process is for finding a job. And generally, this is sort of the two general pathways that you might want, or that you would probably go. So essentially, you would look around for a job, you would find something that's cool that you want to do, and then you match at least 50% of the qualifications that are listed in that job. Meaning that you don't need to have all of the qualifications, but you should, at least 50% will give you a shot at least getting an interview and seeing if you're a good fit for the job or not. So that's kind of the target. Assuming that you find that job, then the next thing you would do is you would send in your resume. Some poor, overworked, non-specialist HR person would read your resume, find that you match the keywords that they were told about, and then if that is the case, or alternatively, an automated system scans your resume for keywords also. And and then ultimately that gets sent over, and then they'll hopefully give you an interview. So in both those cases, either the automated system or the HR person, neither of those are specialized, right? Neither of those know kind of what your um, what the details of your skills, of your experience, of your whatever actually mean, right? They don't really know, so you have to kind of essentially make it easy for them to be able to pick you out of the pile of CVs as have fitting what they're looking for, which is why a lot of this is about kind of at least getting to the interview stage is about matching your CV with keywords that they're looking for, right? So just kind of keep that in mind. You're really kind of looking to do that, emphasize that both in your resume and in your LinkedIn profiles. So that's generally the main pathway that people find jobs with. The other one is using LinkedIn to advertise yourself. A recruiter finds you, tells you to apply for a job, and then same idea, you send in your resume, and then there's still a overworked HR person or an automated system that looks through it, and then hopefully you get an interview. So that's kind of generally the two main paths to getting a job. So obviously, both the LinkedIn profile and the resume are important parts of that process. So that's why we're talking about today. Specifically, we're going to talk about the resume to start with. All right. So just generally speaking, your resume should start with like a header, or really something kind of simple with like just basic information on there. Things like, for example, your home address if you want, your phone number, your email, and your, for example, LinkedIn, a link to your LinkedIn profile. You don't have to include your home address. I think it's a little bit old school. I think nobody really does that anymore. But yeah, either way, so you should have at least your name, obviously, your professional email, your phone number. If you have a website, you want to put a link to your website. If you have a GitHub with like a bunch of cool stuff on there, you want to put a link to that, and you want to put a link to your LinkedIn profile. Yeah. So obviously, your GitHub, only put a link to it if there's actually like stuff in there. If you just set up a GitHub just right now and there's nothing in there, one, there's no point into it. Kind of looks bad, more than anything, because they'll click on there and be like, oh, this person hasn't actually done anything. So yeah, same thing. If you have a website and it looks cool and has like cool stuff and all the interesting things that you do, then that's fine. You can definitely put it on there. But if you have a janky website that you haven't like looked at in 10 years, then don't do that. Yeah. Obviously, all of the links should work. You're in a tech field. You should be able to make links work. If they don't work, it looks bad for you, and that's kind of a really bad sign, kind of right off the bat. So yeah, that's a good question. So it's not necessarily bad to include your home address if it's not where you're applying for. Like if it's a different location from the place you're applying to. However, if you do that, if you do include your home address and it's a different location, and even then, like realistically, most people will kind of be able to figure out kind of where you're at based on your current job or stuff like that. Either which way, you want to address it like, oh, you're willing to move, or you're like, or whatever. If the job is remote, then that's another thing. But one way or the other, you kind of want to address that. Um, sorry, hang on. All right, I'm not sure who. Someone is not muted, so can you check if you're not muted to mute yourself, please? All right. Yeah, so obviously, yeah, so it can be a benefit. So you might get a relocation bonus, but usually those will get offered kind of like later down the line. And usually they'll offer those if they really want you, and you kind of don't want to get into that sort of thinking of like asking for relocation bonus before you're actually at least getting an interview, right? At that point, if they want you enough to ask you for an interview, then you can start talking about those things. But before then, you don't want to give them any excuse to kind of throw your CV out of the pile, right? Yeah. So just kind of something to think about. But either which way, like if you're willing to relocate, then you should at least, it doesn't have to be a big thing, but you can just say a quick like little like, oh, I'm willing to relocate or whatever. I think generally the assumption though is if you're applying for a job that's somewhere different from where you live, I think the assumption is sort of that you're you're smart enough to know that that will probably mean relocating. So 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 yeah, it's not that big of a deal. Um, yeah. Um, but either way, yeah, in my opinion, I would just say just leave the home address out. Like there's no real benefit or use to it. And it's again you're taking up space on a page for something that isn't super useful. So I would just skip it. Um, all right. Then somewhere you want to have your education. This should be super short. You really, you don't want to like go into a whole lot of detail here. Um, you basically just want to be like super factual, like the dates and where you did your school and what the degree was, and that's basically it, right? It should be in chronological order. Yeah, should be in the chronological order: school, location, years, attending major, the minor if it's helpful. If it's not, skip it. Again, you want to make things as short and concise as to the point as possible. Don't put a whole bunch of extra stuff that no one cares about, or specifically that the job that you're applying to doesn't care about. Don't include those. There's no real use to it. Right. Um, all right. So yeah, if you attended somewhere but didn't graduate, basically don't put it on there unless there's a very, 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 very good reason. If you have like half a degree in something that's extremely relevant to the job you're applying to, and you can explain it in a positive way, then you can include it. But generally, you want to avoid, because again, it shows that you kind of started something and didn't finish it. Like I have actually a half finished degree somewhere in there, and I basically don't include it because one, it looks bad, and two, for the most part, it's not relevant. I only ever include it if it's like extremely relevant for whatever I'm applying to. No, I would skip high school diploma again. Like for the most part, the jobs. I mean, if you're if you're here, it's because you're about to graduate uh, an undergrad, right? Um, and so it's assumed that you have your high school diploma, and where you did your high school doesn't really it's not really that important for employers. Um, yeah, so for the most part, I would just skip it. And it's fine to have just kind of just one thing in education. Again, it's not you're not really trying to like sell yourself here. It's more of an informational thing of like, oh, this is where they did their undergrad, and this is when they did it, sort of thing. Um, yeah. Uh, right. If you're currently about to graduate, you can put something like 2018 to fall 22, or whenever your expected graduation date is. That's totally fine. Employers know that like if you're kind of like about to graduate or still in school, um, they expect to kind of see like what your expected graduation date is, and that gives them an idea of like when you might actually be available ish. Um, yeah, skip your GPAs. I know that throughout your entire academic careers, you've been told that your GPA is super important. For the most part, when you're looking for a job, it's not. Employers basically don't really care about your GPA. If they really, really, really care about it, they will ask you for it, in which case you can and should include it. But for the most part, it doesn't matter. It's not important. If you absolutely, absolutely insist on including it, only include it if you have like something at 3.5 or higher, or something that's really kind of, um, that shows that you excelled. But again, for the most part, I think by putting your GPA, you're kind of showing that you're kind of still kind of new and kind of inexperienced, and that's not really what you're going for. And for the most part, employers don't really care about that. So I would say just generally just skip it unless they request it. Um, Right. You can include your honors if you did an honors thesis or something like that. For the most part, I would say don't include it unless it's relevant. If you did an honors thesis that's directly relevant to the job that you're applying to, then sure, include it. That's totally fine. If you didn't, then don't. Again, you're trying to keep things as short and concise as possible. Only include stuff that's relevant. If there's a whole bunch of stuff on your CV that is irrelevant to the job that you're applying to, it makes them think that like, oh, they're just kind of like spamming everyone with their CV and not really paying attention to where they're applying to. They don't really care about my job, and that generally looks bad for you. Um, all right. Um, right. So you should have a skills section. Basically, this should be all the skills that you have. And especially so, it should include, for one, the skills that you have actual like applied in a job or some kind of experience with, but also kind of maybe more importantly, all the skills that you don't necessarily have work experience in, but you do have those skills, right? And especially kind of like early in your careers, these are the things that might be more, you'll have more of these because you won't have as much work experience, but you will have skills. So here's where you want to really highlight those. Um, right. So yeah, you can include certifications. I mean, again, like depending on what it is and depending how relevant it is, but definitely, it's totally fine and good to include certifications if they're relevant. Yeah, absolutely. Um, right. So yeah, only list the skills sections that are important. And again, you tailoring your CV to a specific job, only include the things that are relevant for that job, right? Um, so this is, an example of what it could look like. Personally, I would avoid the et cetera over here. I would just list the methods that are relevant to the job I'm applying to and just leave it there. Um, um, do you mean coding languages or like talking languages? Um,
Yeah, coding.
yeah. Um, so I would only include languages that you are comfortable, that you'd be comfortable like working in, basically. Like your, as long as your proficiency level is okay enough that you would be able to kind of like work and do stuff with it, then I think that's fine. Like I took a job way back when, I think before my master's, where they were looking for someone who coded in R, and I had like dabbled a little bit, but I really hadn't like done a whole lot. I was like, yeah, sure, I can do it. And then I spent like the next 2 months before starting the job just teaching myself R, so that I could like, you know, be up to date by the time I started. Um, but that's, I would say that's the more the example of what not to do than the example of what to do. In that case, I knew I had enough time to actually do that before I started the job, and I knew that my coding skills were good enough that I'd be able to like pick it up pretty quickly, and I knew that R was close enough to some other languages that I knew. um, so yeah, so basically only include stuff that you would feel comfortable um, like actually like doing the work in, right? Right. Um, so yeah, and again, just list things that are relevant, right? So for example, methods. If I listed every single one of the stats that I know, the stats methods that I know and I've used, it'd be a paragraph, or like it'd be a long paragraph. And for the most part, a lot of that isn't relevant for every job. And so I'd look at the job, I would think about like, what are they looking for? What type of analyses is this job specifically probably looking for? And I would list those and leave it at that, right? Um, the assumption is that you're not listing every single thing that you have, but you're listing things that are kind of relevant to the job. Yeah, or at least things that are potentially reasonably relevant to the job that you're applying to, if that makes sense. Only include things that are kind of like useful to know. Don't include things like that you know how to use, Microsoft Word. That's not really so much a skill. It's kind of assumed that you've probably worked in some kind of like um, um, word processor at some point. And it's not exactly rocket science to use Word, so avoid that kind of stuff. But if you've used Microsoft Access or kind of more specialized stuff, then you could include that for sure. But again, you want to kind of gauge things of like things that are not obviously everyone knows these things, and things that kind of like that are relevant to the job, and that'll help you stand out a little bit more of being like a really good fit for that specific job, if that kind of makes sense. And again, only include sections that are relevant. If you're applying um, for a job that doesn't need stats, then don't include a stats section, right? That kind of thing. All right. Right. And when you're kind of putting these skills out there, use keywords. Use the keywords that everyone else uses. Again, an HR person who doesn't necessarily know the meaning of these things, or an automated system who definitely doesn't know the meaning of these things, they're the ones who are searching for these keywords, and so your skills that you're listing in your CV, in your resume, need to match the things they're looking for, right? So So don't get creative. Use the things that everyone else is using. Use the names for things. Use the and using sometimes using jargon that's relevant to a specific field kind of shows that you're like in the know, that you know how people talk or how people talk about things. Um, so that's a kind of thing to keep in mind. You want to really think of it as like you're setting up a website for to be able to kind of to come up with like certain keywords. Same idea with your CV. You're trying to like set your CV up in a way that is easily searchable for specific things that people are looking for, right? All right. All right, experience. So here you can include stuff like various professional like work experiences, volunteer experiences is fine, school experiences are fine. The idea here is essentially to show that you actually have applied some of the skills that you have, right? And again, you don't have to demonstrate that you've applied all of the skills that in the previous section, but some of those skills you should be able to show like, oh, I've actually done something with these skills in mind, right? Um, and generally the format should look something like this, um, where it should have the company name, location, and dates in the same format as the education. All of your dates should be formatted the same throughout your CV. um, and then generally you want to use kind of what's called problem first language, where we're using action verbs and you're saying like I solved this problem by doing XYZ. For each of these jobs, you want to have like kind of the header of like this is a job and this is where it was and this is the location and date and all that, and then under it a couple of bullets, 2 to 4 bullets per experience is kind of what you're going for. um, where you basically say stuff like you solved this problem, you managed a team of 4 and did XYZ projects, stuff like that. You want to really kind of one, you want to use kind of action verbs, and there's a link here to a list of nice action verbs you can use. And you want to really demonstrate, not just say like you managed people, because that's super vague and it makes me and employers think like, oh, um, they're trying to hide the fact that like managed people could mean a lot of things, right? That could be like um, that you like talked with your coworker once about their project or something. Um, so you want to be specific. You want to allay any doubts that they have about your actual skills. You want to demonstrate that you actually did use these skills and give them clear, specific examples of how you actually use those skills, right? And I know that for the most part throughout your academic careers, you probably have been taught to be as vague as possible, because that's a really safe way to like get points without like getting a whole bunch of stuff docked. But that's not the point here. That's not the goal at all. You want to be specific, and you want to clearly say like, this is exactly what I did. This is how I use my skills, right? Basically, being vague is a really strong indicator to employers that you're trying to hide, or you're trying to hide stuff or dissimulate or something like that. Um, yeah. All right. I know this is a little bit silly, but I would say add numbers. Add numbers because it again helps makes things more specific. If you say that you managed 4 people, then there's a clear number. You can't lie about the number 4. The number 4 is just the number 4. If you say you managed people, is it 1 person or like 100 people? We don't really know, right? The other thing too is grammatically, numbers under 10 should be actually written like spelled out instead of like put the actual numbers. Ignore that rule. For CVs and stuff like that, you don't want to do that. You want to put actual numbers like here. And the idea being is that just visually, the numbers kind of stand out more from the text. And those numbers standing out and specifically giving specific information about like how many, for example, if you manage like 4 people, how many people you managed, how many years of experience you have, so on and so forth. And so yeah, so I would say definitely add numbers, quantify your experiences as much as possible. You want to be, again, that's part of making it detailed. You want to quantify things as much as possible and actually write it out in numbers and not in text. Right. So you might have a bunch of projects, like for example, the capstone, your capstone project is a project. So you might want to have a separate section from experience that is just projects, which I think is fine, and you can do. But I would essentially say if you have enough projects to make it its own distinct section, then yeah, definitely do that. if you have like one project, then just including your experience, right? You want to have like a section that's like just one and only thing all by itself. The other thing too is if you have a project section, or if you just list projects in your experience, um, put links to it, right? If you have a project that you did something cool, you want the employer to be able to like click on it and go and check it out and see how cool it actually is, right? Um, again, it's really easy to say, look, I did this really cool thing. But if there's no like evidence or proof behind it, it's really hard for employers to kind of trust that that is actually true, or really have a sense of like how cool that thing actually was, right? Um, so yeah, so always put links to your various projects and things. All right, formatting. So again, so the poor overworked HR person is looking at hundreds and hundreds of CVs, um, and it is not entertaining work. Oh, um, how many projects? So I would say, I think depending, I think it's a little bit relative. If you have one work experience and one project, I think that kind of looks bad. If you have, 3, 4 work experiences and like 2 projects, that's not so bad. Relatively speaking, you don't want one thing to be disproportionately smaller than the other. Again, a lot of times, like the HR person is at least gonna like skim your CV, just kind of super quickly take a glance at it, and you don't want to like have any red flags of like one section that looks really small compared to everything else, right? So just kind of keep that in mind. So I think if your project session has 2 things and everything else is like 2 or 3 things, I think that's fine. It also, I think, depends on how extensive or how cool those projects were. If they're all like if you have like 2 very small projects, then I probably wouldn't make a section just for that. But if you have 2 very like involved, really cool projects, then I think that's more than enough for its own section. So yeah, it's all, there's no hard and fast rule, but it's all about kind of like what impression do you want to give, right? Do you want to give the impression that your projects are cool enough to have a section of their own, or if you have a section of their own and your projects are not very cool or not very impressive, um, then you're going to make the person think like, well, why is there a whole section just for these 2 like small projects, right? Um, so yeah, so that's kind of the thinking you want to have about having its own section. All right, so formatting. The HR person is looking at 100 CVs. Like they're looking at a ton of CVs, and you would be surprised at how many badly formatted CVs they probably receive. And so having a nice, clean, like good-looking CV goes a long way. Just getting that first impression. And these are all things that are like psychologically happening that we're not consciously aware of, but they're all things that like change our impression of the person, of the CV they were looking at, right? So if at a first glance they pull out your CV and it like looks good, that's not really good. You're starting off, you're putting them in a good mood before they even start reading anything, right? Um, and again, you're essentially asking for this HR person to kind of pass your CV along, so they pull you in for an interview. You're asking for this person to do something for you. You're asking, not for a favor, but like sort of make things easy on them, make things like easy and comfortable and convenient for them. You're asking them for something, make their life easy. All right. So like I mentioned, you want to keep all your formatting neat and consistent. Everything should look like it all fits together. If you have different fonts all over the place and it all looks like super disjointed and that you kind of threw this thing together, that shows. And again, it just puts the person like, before they even read anything, it gives them the impression like, oh, this person doesn't care, like they didn't like put the time and attention they need to make this like nice and clean. And right off the bat, you're starting off from a bad place. All of your date formats should be the same. So the dates, the how you formatted your years for your education, you should use the same formatting throughout for your experiences for everything else. um, again, you want to keep things as consistent. You don't want to make the person have to like hunt down what the information they're looking for. Everything should be like as easy, as accessible as possible. Um, all right, so you also want to shoot for somewhere that there's not too much and not too little white space. If there's too much white space, it makes a person think, oh, well, either they don't have a lot of experience, or they don't know, they didn't like think about formatting this to make, kind of spread it out a little bit more, then use their space very wisely. If there's too little white space, it makes the person think like, one, this is cluttered and it gives me a headache just to look at it. And two, it also gives the impression that you don't care enough to actually edit your stuff down to make it like more comfortable. Odds are, if everything is like super jammed in your page, you could probably spend a little bit of time cleaning things up, um, you know, changing the language, things that like take 2 sentences, you could probably take it down to one, stuff like that. Just make things a little bit more like concise so that the whole thing looks a little bit neater and a little bit more kind of well thought through and a little bit more well organized. All right. Right, you want your headers to be clear, the education, the experience, and all that. You want those headers to be super clear so that, again, you're trying to make things as easy as possible for this HR person to hunt down the information they're looking for. Don't make things hard for them, right? Their job is already hard enough. You don't need to make it harder. Don't be afraid to use things like bolding or slightly larger fonts or colored lines or something to draw the eye to certain things or delineate certain sections. You want to be careful to not go overboard. If there's like a lot of stuff going on, it looks super busy, that is not good. But a little bit kind of goes a long way to make things look a little bit more pleasant and draw the eye in certain locations that you want it to, right? So definitely don't be afraid to use things like that. Yeah. Right. So if you're finding that ideally everything should fit within a page, if you're finding that you're having trouble fitting everything into a page, one, you should just kind of revise and edit and edit and edit over and over again until you can kind of like make your language as tight and concise as possible. If at that point you're like really close but not quite, you can shrink the margins a little bit to kind of fit everything into one page. That's okay, but don't go overboard. Essentially, you want to make it like, if you do it, it should be subtle enough that it's not obvious. Again, the person looking at your CV is looking through, 100 CVs who probably all have the same margins. And if yours is like significantly smaller than the other ones, it's obvious. And they'll be like, oh, this person, like, instead of actually doing their job of editing down and paying attention to their CV, they're just like, oh, I'll just bust out the margins and call it good, right? Which again is not the impression that you want to give to a potential employer. All right. All right. Any questions on that so far? Yeah. If you're including a link for a game, they don't need the link to the code or the repository. You can include it if you want, but for the most part, like, or if they wanted, they can also just ask you. But essentially, you want to demonstrate like the skill, the finished product more than the code, right? Yeah. Other questions? Were we on time? Yeah. All right. That's still good. All right. So on here, there's links to a couple, 3 examples of CVs, different types of CVs. They're not perfect, and that's fine. There's no such thing as a perfect CV anyway, so that's fine too. Yeah, but these are at least good examples of what a CV, a good CV would look like. When you kind of look at these at a first glance and you read through, they seem pretty well put together, and there's no like big red flags. There's no big issues. These are kind of pretty good looking CVs. On D2L, there should also be Dr. Wetherell's resume and CV. I didn't include mine because I've been in academia for a while, and my main CV is an academic CV, which is like a whole completely different thing. And so it would not be at all useful for you. And my last like professional CV that I did is a while back, so and I haven't updated it yet. So but we have Dr. Wetherell, and she's had like a billion different jobs, different types of jobs, and she's really good at kind of like presenting that information. So those are definitely good examples to check out as well. All right. So yeah, so that's pretty much what I have to say about resumes for now. So let's talk about your LinkedIn profiles real quick. So your LinkedIn profiles are essentially sort of like an online version of your, or an online very much shortened version of your resume, right? And potentially it can be a bridge between you and your resume, where it can be kind of like the entry point where they're like, oh, this person seems like a good fit, and then they can go and look at your resume to see if you actually are a good fit, right? Yeah. So essentially, what you're going for is you want to draw in people, potentially recruiters. You want it to look professional, and you want to look kind of like good, and you want to make it easily searchable, because recruiters are kind of scouring LinkedIn for these things. So things that you should probably think about. One, you want to have a clear and professional headshot. Graduation photo is totally fine. What you don't want is a picture of you like out with your friends drinking. That's not the point. You want something that's like that is an actual headshot, and that looks like professional, right? I would highly recommend updating your URL. LinkedIn will allow you to make a customized URL for free, and these are the instructions to do that. It looks just a little bit neater, and like you've put a little bit more thought into it. And also when you're like putting the link on a CV or something, it looks like just basically like you can basically just put like your name or something like that. So and that just kind of looks a little bit better. We'll look at an example of what is a good LinkedIn profile in a second. You want to use keywords in your headline that are searchable. Again, your CV, your resume, and your LinkedIn profile should be easily searchable. That's kind of the goal. If you're looking for a data science job, put something about data science and data science specific keywords. If you're looking for a game development job, put keywords that are relevant for that job. Yeah. You can put a little custom background in there too. Again, you want to stand out a little bit, make yourself look a little bit different from everyone else. If you just have the same generic background as everyone else, I mean, sorry about that. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with like the generic one, but if you have, if you have a pretty like a nice looking picture or something, that can help you stand out a little bit more, right? And then sort of the meat of the whole thing is the summary, which should be very short, and it should be sort of a really brief way to say who you are, what you're interested about, what you're like, what experience you have, what kind of like just a really short resume of like kind of who you are and what you potentially could be bringing to the table. Sort of think about it as like a like a really awkward like book blurb, like in the back of books when there's like a short blurb about the author, you can think of it sort of that way. Or like I like to think of it as like a like an about me section, like on a dating profile or something, right? Where you're basically trying to sell yourself in a very short kind of like amount of space. It's the same idea here. You're trying to sell yourself to potential employers. All right, so let's look at an example of a good LinkedIn profile. So this is Nick DiRienzo. He was a professor at U of A. I think he might still be teaching some classes, but he has a full-time job elsewhere also. Yeah, that's a good question. Why are photos considered appropriate for LinkedIn but not for resumes? Yeah, that is a good question. I'm not sure why, but I would also say, actually, I think there's nothing wrong with putting a picture on a resume. I think back in the day when people actually printed resumes, I think there was like some issue with like wasting printer toner, and printing everything in black and white, and the pictures didn't necessarily come out right. So I think there's part of that. But I think there's nothing inherently wrong with putting a picture on a resume, actually. What I would say, though, is that there is clear, demonstrable evidence of all kinds of implicit bias made in hiring decisions, and so yeah. So I would say that there's potentially some issues there with putting a photo in, yeah, and enabling some sort of implicit bias, which anyway, yeah. That so just kind of something to be aware of. Yeah, which is unfortunate and definitely not a good thing, but yeah. All right. So yeah, so Nick, so this is this is what his LinkedIn profile used to look like. And essentially, so he used to be a professor at U of A, and he actually got headhunted from his LinkedIn profile to go work in an industry job. I think at the time he's already like 3 or 4 jobs later from this, and this was like 2 years ago, I think. But yeah, I think he got headhunted from his job at U of A to, I think, Mattress Plus, and then from there again headhunted from there to U-Haul, and again headhunted from U-Haul to Penske, where he currently is right now. Um, so point being that LinkedIn profiles are actually a viable way to get jobs, and believe me, it is way less soul crushing to be headhunted than to be sending out 100 CVs and getting no bites. So a little bit of time and attention to your LinkedIn profiles is not a bad thing. It can save you a lot of work. And again, this is a LinkedIn profile that he had up when he got headhunted, so it's probably a good example of what you might want to look for. All right, so a few things that I mentioned. So like I said, he has a custom URL. And so basically this is his link to his LinkedIn profile. So it doesn't have a whole bunch of like letters and numbers. It basically is just like LinkedIn and his name. So that's nice. It looks nice and clean. He has a nice headshot. Look at that face. He seems like a nice guy. You would want to work with that guy, right? So again, that is good. He has a title with keywords. He's saying he's a professor, so that's the job he has. He's a professor of data science, so he was looking for data science jobs, so that makes sense. And then he's saying where he actually worked. So I think that's not a bad set of keywords. He has such a short summary, and so it's not all here, but I think all in all is like maybe five um, 5 lines long. So it's still relatively short. Yeah, and so and basically, he's basically saying he's a data scientist. He has a passion for education, and then he's saying like stuff that he did. He developed and taught courses, saying data science and data engineering. So he's already like putting out some skills that he has. Saying using R and Python. So he's putting out specific languages that he knows. So again, like you're using this as to kind of sell yourself, to kind of like give information about what skills and kind of who you are, what you're bringing to the table, potentially things that you're excited about. Like his goal is to use applied and interactive lessons to engage everyone from newbie who's never coded, blah blah blah. But he's essentially saying like this is what I'm excited about, this is what I'm interested in, which are all good things to kind of include in your summary, in your about section. Yeah, and so like I said, this is the LinkedIn profile. I think he's updated since, so it's not the one that he got for his Penske job, but this is the one he got headhunted from when he was still working at U of A, where he was still a professor at U of A. All right, so this is actually, I just Googled him up this morning, and this is his most updated LinkedIn profile. So still looks pretty much the same. His about section is shorter even, basically saying professor turned data scientist, machine learning powered data products. So that's already like a pretty good set of keywords. And to make truck drivers safer and employees happier. So that gives you a sense of kind of what the work he's doing. And then when he's not doing that, taking time to process and mentor our junior data scientists, because I think he's still involved with the U of A teaching and mentoring, just not as a full-time professor. Yes, you should include, so you can and should include a background picture. So Nick actually doesn't. I think these are some of the generic ones. But so looking at my LinkedIn profile, this is what mine currently looks like. It is not necessarily an example to follow. Definitely follow Nick is the one that you want to follow, not mine. But yeah, so I feel like having a for me, background photo, a lot of my research is with ants, so I put ants back here, and most people like looking at ants. So that's for me, that's a good thing. Let's see here. Yeah, so I also have a custom URL, so I think at least that makes sense. It's a really easy thing to do, and it looks good. You want to have a profile picture. My profile picture is not great, but I don't have any headshots, and I haven't actually been looking for a job for a while, so I haven't updated this in a little bit. I have a title with keywords. Yeah, and so I'm both included professor of data science and sort of like behavioral ecologist is sort of my kind of research side. So I have kind of both of those together at the same time. And again, just kind of including keywords that might be relevant. And then my summary down here is definitely more research focused and not at all updated since I started at the school. So again, um, do what Nick did, don't do what I do. I'm not a good example, but I wanted to at least show you kind of what it potentially also could look like. Um, all right. Um, so, right. So general rules that you might want to follow for your summary for your about me. You want to sort of stick to about 40 words or less. You don't want it to be super long. You want it to be a little bit shorter and just kind of punching into the point. Again, think dating profile, right? Think like you're just trying to be like short and punchy and draw people in, right? So 40 words or less. Bullet points are totally fine. And everyone likes numbers, right? So similar principles to your resumes. This is sort of an example of a format that you can use that actually I think works pretty well. Um, Sort of like a not a format, but a formula that you can follow ish. I mean, you don't have to follow this exactly, but it kind of gives a good kind of idea or good direction to kind of start off with, right? Where you're starting with like a compelling action word or something that like sounds nice, the job that you did with a keyword, X amount of experience in whatever field or job title, and then kind of an example of what you do, what you're excited about, right? So, for example, you might want to say something like award winning. So that's kind of compelling. You're already right off the bat saying that you won awards. So that's nice. Award winning data analyst. So you're saying what job you have and potentially what job you're looking for. 2 years of experience in Python and R coding. So you're setting out your skills that you have or some skills that you have that you want to like highlight. And then, I help companies measure their social media profiles to improve sales leads. So you're already putting like a clear example of a thing that you have done that looks good and it's a specific application of skills, right? Um, so yeah, so I'm not going to go through all of the examples, but you can kind of read through these. They're sort of following this formula-ish. Like I'm aware that the first things aren't actually like passionate and detail focused is not an action word, but it is compelling and it is like sort of like an adjective or whatever. It's an additional like starting off with something really positive that colors like the rest of it. Um, and then the job, and then skills, and then things that you're interested about. That's sort of the idea of the general formatting, right? So yeah, so and yeah, I feel like these actually generally lead to some pretty like short, concise, but really compelling summaries. And so this is not a bad thing to kind of try to emulate. All right, and there's another link down here to 185 powerful verbs that will make your resume awesome. So definitely check those out. Yeah. All right. So yeah. So in this process, you are trying to engage your inner narcissist. You need to hype yourself. I know that for some of you, for me, definitely, it is not easy for me to like hype myself, to like sell myself and be like extremely positive about like all the stuff that I've done. It's just not like my comfort zone, but you need to do it. Everyone else is doing it, and if you want to be like on the same level or like kind of like shine as much as everyone else, you just kind of need to do it and just kind of like get over that and just kind of like hype yourself, sell yourself. You are awesome, and tell us all the reasons you are awesome. Right? That's what you're going for. Things that can be useful for that. Um, Two things that you might want to kind of start doing now, which I do as much as possible. I have essentially two Word docs on my desktop. One is why I'm awesome, which are reminders from jobs I've done. So basically, whenever I do something that like I'm really happy about, I'm really like, psyched about, like I just did this really cool thing, I'll go in there and just type a quick summary of like what I just did. The idea being that I'm writing it while I'm still excited and like hyped about it, and not when I'm in the process of writing my CV when I'm like, oh, I don't want to be doing this right now. What did I do that was awesome? I don't remember. I can go back to this file and look through it and use the kind of like really happy pumped up language that I was using when I wrote it in the first time. The other thing too is another one I keep is just buzzwords and things to remember about my work. So oftentimes using specific buzzwords or things that that we know will sound good. You can whenever you think of them, just pop them in there, and you'll have them when you're writing on working on your CV or summaries or cover letters or whatever else, right? So yeah. The other thing is use the buddy system. Pretty much none. I've never sent out any application materials without having at least one person look at them, right? The idea being that you want some other person, ideally, like if you have a mentor or professor or just someone that you really trust that has good instincts and good track record of getting jobs. Ask them to look over your stuff. Most people are totally happy to do it. Colleagues, peers, mentors, whoever, a lot of people are really happy to do that. And having them look through things, one, they'll catch a lot of like small formatting errors or small like typos that you can't see anymore because you've already looked at this thing too much. But also they'll probably have some really good insights of like, oh, you might want to do this, or this is a really good way to kind of like word this thing. Or oftentimes other people will be more hyped about kind of the stuff that you did. You'd be like, oh no, I did this thing, but I guess it's okay. They're like, no, that's actually really awesome. You should like sell it by saying these things, right? So again, just have other people look through your documents, proofread them, and give you feedback. Definitely do that. Okay, and then I think the class is, yeah, we're basically at 11:50. So last thing, the assignment. The assignment for this week that's due on Friday is basically just creating a LinkedIn profile if you don't have one. If you already have one, just look through it and see if you can improve it. It's graded on effort, right? I'm not going to like look at your LinkedIn CVs and be like, oh, this person like, I give this summary a 4 out of 5. No, basically show me that have a really well put together a LinkedIn profile that looks good, and that's what I'm looking for, right? If you already have one and you're already pretty happy with it, just look through it and see if you can improve it a little bit. That's sort of the idea, right? And that's basically that's all it is for the assignment. Sorry, so we can call it there because we're at time. As usual, I'll stick around if anyone has any questions or wants to talk about anything. But otherwise, you can head on out.
So do we just submit the link to the LinkedIn profile then?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.
Dan, I have a question that came up. So, like you said, there's like the unspoken rule for the 50% qualifications. Does that also translate to when job postings say that you have to have like 3 years of experience? Or like how? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for the most part, I think you want to have maybe a little bit more than 50% of what they're asking for, but you can be under. If they're asking for 3 years and you have like 2 years, I would still apply. So the thing is, it sort of depends. Like different jobs have different sort of like things they're kind of more hard about. Some jobs might be like, no, the cutoff is 3 and that's that. Other jobs might be like, well, 2 or 3, good enough, or it also depends on what the applicant pool is like. If they ask for 3 years and literally no one applies that has 3 years, then it's a good thing that you also applied. So I'd say if you're close-ish, I would apply anyway. Yeah, and still, 50% might be like the lower end of what I may be comfortable with, but it might still be worth it if you're like a year and a half. Yeah, I would still consider applying.
Do you know anything about how hard IBM or like their requirements?
I do not.
No. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I was just wondering. No, I was just wondering. Okay. Thank you,
Yeah.
Dan. Have a great spring break.
But you could probably find people who work at IBM, and I mean honestly, you could probably like write to the HR department and ask them straight up. For the most part, like it's not hidden information, right? It's not a secret. For the most part, if you just kind of ask or call, or I'd probably just email for something like that. But like, yeah, you could probably just ask them how they do it, right?
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah. Have a good spring break too.
You too. Bye.
Bye.